So, when I say Japan, what pops into your head? Is it the sleek bullet trains, maybe Nintendo, or just incredible food? Probably all of that, right? But you've also probably heard that for decades now, its economy has been, well, stuck. It's this high-tech cultural giant that seems like it should be thriving. So what's really going on? And that right there, that's the big paradox, isn't it? How can those two things be true at the same time? How can a country feel so advanced and so rich while its economy is basically flatlining? Well, that is exactly the mystery we're going to unravel today. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the paradox itself. Then, we'll rewind to Japan's insane economic miracle. After that, we'll pinpoint the one event that threw a wrench in the works, explore the fallout, what they call the lost decades, and the very real human cost of it all. And finally, we'll answer that big question. How do they pull it all off? All right, Section 1, the Japanese paradox. Let's just set the scene for a second. If you've ever been to Japan or even just seen videos, you know it's a country that just works, right? The streets are unbelievably clean, the trains are always on time, and everything feels safe and efficient. It honestly feels like you've stepped into the future. And that's why all this talk about a struggling economy feels so weird. It just doesn't match up with what you see. Okay, let's move on. Section 2, an economic miracle. So to really get why Japan is stuck, we've got to go back in time. We have to look at its absolutely mind-blowing rise from total ruin. So think about it. 1945, World War II is over, and Japan is just decimated, a country in ruins. But then, just 5 years later, the Korean War starts. And this, believe it or not, becomes Japan's lifeline. The U.S. needed a supply base right there in the region, so they started pouring huge military orders into Japan. This jump-started their factories. That, plus American aid, basically put Japan on the bullet train to recovery. And from that point on, Japan just went into beast mode on exports. You had this perfect storm, a culture famous for its work ethic, pretty low wages at the time, and this super tight teamwork between the government, the banks, and the big corporations. They just started pumping out cars, TVs, you name it. And boom, brands like Toyota and Sony weren't just Japanese anymore, they were global. By the 1980s, it seriously looked like nothing could stop them. Okay, next up, Section 3, the deal and the bubble. Now, here's the twist. Japan got so good at this, so successful, that it actually started to make its number one ally, the US, really nervous. See, America was buying way more stuff from Japan than it was selling to them, creating these massive trade deficits. So this all leads to a single, fateful meeting in New York City that would literally alter Japan's entire future. This meeting was called the Plaza Accord. It happened in 1985. Basically, the world's biggest economies, the US, Japan, Germany, and others, all got together and agreed to, well, to deliberately weaken the US dollar. The whole point was to make American products more competitive on the world stage. But for that to work, it meant another currency had to get a lot stronger. And that currency was the Japanese yen. And the impact was instant. Think about it. A super strong yen was an absolute disaster for an economy built on selling things abroad. All of a sudden, those Toyotas and Sony Walkmans got way more expensive for everyone else. And what happens when your products get more expensive? People buy less. Japanese corporate profits just fell off a cliff. So what do? The Japanese government kind of panicked. Their response was to slash interest rates to the floor. They made money incredibly, ridiculously cheap to borrow. The idea, of course, was to get people spending and to boost the economy. But what happened instead is that they accidentally lit the fuse on a bomb. One of the biggest financial bubbles the world has ever seen. And what came next was just pure madness. People and companies took all this cheap loan money and just shoveled it into the stock market and real estate. Prices didn't just go up, they went vertical. I mean, check this out. At the very peak, a single square meter of land in Tokyo's fancy Ginza district, that's about the size of a small rug, cost $1.5 million. There were even calculations that the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than all the real estate in California. It was just insane. And now for Section 4, the lost decades. Because, a bubble like that, it can't last forever. And in the early 1990s, it didn't just pop. It exploded. And this crash, it wasn't just about money. It left a deep psychological scar on the whole country. So here's how the spiral started. First, the crash happens. Stock market, real estate, it all collapses. Banks are suddenly stuck with mountains of loans that will never be paid back. Then, people, totally traumatized by watching their savings disappear, they clamp their wallets shut. They stop spending and start saving like crazy. This kicks off something really dangerous, deflation. That means prices start to fall. And that sounds good, right? But it's a trap. Because if you know that TV is going to be cheaper next month, what do? You wait. But if everyone waits, the whole economy just grinds to a halt. And that's the cycle. Wages don't go up, so people save even more, and the economy stays stuck. And you gotta give them credit. Japan threw everything they had at this problem. They cut interest rates all the way to zero. At one point, they even went negative. They were the first country ever to try this thing called quantitative easing, or QE, which is basically printing money to juice the economy. It's a policy that central banks all over the world use now. But none of it worked. That psychological scar from the crash was just too deep. People and companies were just too scared to borrow or spend, no matter how cheap it was. And so the economy just stayed frozen in time for decades. This leads us to our next section, Section 5, a society under pressure. Because this is where a big abstract economic problem starts to have very real, very human consequences. 3 decades of going nowhere economically, well, it's put an incredible amount of pressure on Japanese society. And it's led to some really unique and frankly pretty sad social issues. First off, let's talk about demographics. Just look at this. Japan is by far the oldest country on the planet. The median age is almost 50 years old. To put that in perspective, the world average is just under 31. Think about that. Nearly 1 in every 3 people in Japan is over 65. The country is shrinking, and a lot of that is a direct result of all this economic uncertainty we've been talking about. This pressure has also created a phenomenon known as johatsu, which literally means evaporation. And it's exactly what it sounds like. People who are completely overwhelmed, maybe by debt or the shame of losing their job in such a competitive society, they just disappear. They literally vanish. There are even these secret fly-by-night moving companies you can hire to help you escape your old life and start over somewhere new, completely off the grid. And then there's hikikomori. This translates to pulling inward. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, mostly young men, who completely withdraw from society. And it's important to understand, this isn't about being lazy. They're just completely disillusioned. They look at the economy, they see no real opportunities for themselves, and they just check out. They feel like there's no way forward, so they lock themselves in their bedrooms for months, sometimes even years, totally cut off from everything and everyone. So let's recap. We've got a stuck economy, a shrinking population, and some pretty intense social pressures. Which brings us right back to where we started, to that big question in Section 6, stuck but still rich? After everything we've talked about, how on earth is Japan still so orderly, safe, wealthy, and just functional? It's time to finally solve this paradox. Okay, the first huge piece of the puzzle has to do with its debt. Now, you hear that Japan has one of the biggest piles of government debt in the world, and that's true. But here's the crucial detail. Almost all of that debt is owned by its own citizens and its own institutions. Think of it like a family owing money to itself. Your brother might be annoyed, but he's not going to send a collection agency after you. It means Japan isn't really vulnerable to pressure from other countries demanding to be paid back. So what else keeps Japan afloat? Well, for one, they're giant global companies, your Toyotas, Sonys, Nintendos. They make a ton of their money outside of Japan and bring those profits home. Second, all that amazing infrastructure, the bullet trains, the highways, that was mostly built and paid for back during the good times, during the boom. And maybe most importantly, Japanese society itself is incredibly stable and has a high level of social trust. There's this idea that maybe Japan has just entered a post-growth phase. They're not focused on expanding anymore, but on perfecting and maintaining the amazing things they've already built. And this leaves us with a really fascinating, kind of provocative final thought. You know, as the rest of the developed world starts to deal with its own aging populations and slowing growth, maybe Japan isn't a cautionary tale of what can go wrong. Maybe it's a preview of what's to come. Perhaps it's not a country that's stuck in the past at all. Maybe it's just a country that's already living in a future that the rest of us haven't quite reached yet.